Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to continue the series on the Nimzo Indian defense with the Kmoch variation or the F3 Nimzo Indian. And the variation is, I would say, very tricky to play for both sides, and I know people who play it, I know people who prefer it against the Nimzo Indian, and I can't say that I like it that much for white. But my opinion is subjective, and very strong players have played it. Magnus Carlsen has played it, and many others. It's definitely playable, but we are sort of getting out of the normal Nimzo Indian territory with this attacking idea of f3. So let's get into the opening. We are going to look at this from white's perspective. So d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, the Nimzo Indian. And now white doesn't play e3 or queen c2 or knight f3, normal moves. White instead plays the move f3. And the point of f3 is very straightforward. You want to control the e4 square, because if white manages to get the move e4 in, he's going to have a broad center, he's going to be uncontested in the center, and have a fairly easy game in theory. Now the problem is, f3 is a very slow and very weakening move. What's the problem with f3? Well, firstly, you are taking one of the most natural squares away from your knight. Secondly, you are going to have to play the move e4 in order to develop your bishop. Thirdly, you are not developing a piece or preparing to castle, so similarly to the move queen c2, f3 is breaking the classical chess principles, while black is playing knight f6, e6, bishop b4, and he's probably going to castle in the next few moves. What has white done? White has expanded in the center, has a pinned knight, and is preparing to expand in the center some more. So it's a risky strategy, and if black is resourceful and if he knows what to do, white is the one who can get punished in this variation way more easily than black, because it's really hard to get to the black king. White is playing for space and for activity later on, but black is the one who is in charge at the moment. So f3, how do we parry that? There are three moves that are possible here: d5, c5, and castles. Knight c6 has also been played, as well as knight h5. Bishop takes c3 has also been played, but that's not as good. I think knight c6 is a fair try, but I wouldn't like to mention it as a good move, because now after a move such as e4, d5, cd5, ed5, e5, I really would prefer to have white. The extra space has paid off, and this knight, if ever captured, is going to just reinforce the center. For the moment, the knight has to move away from f6, and I just want to be white here. Bishop d3, knight e2, knight f4, e6. An attack is coming. Okay, so we are going to be focusing on d5, c5, and castles. Let's look at castles first. That's the least common move. After castles, white is now going to chase this bishop away or force it to capture, and thus have the bishop pair. So a3, bishop takes c3, b takes c3. And now the idea for black is to move his knight away from f6 to be able to expand, and also to anticipate the move e4, e5. So the next move might be really hard to find for people who don't know this variation, and black will either play the move knight h5 or knight e8. Other moves are possible but are far less popular. d5 is a move, but after something like d5, just c takes d5, e takes d5, and now e3 reinforces the center, and white has an easier game than if black had tried to be resourceful right from the start. So something like c5 trying to break open the center, but this structure is now really hard to break, and this is definitely playable. It's a well-known variation, but it's a sideline. So I would recommend either the move knight e8 or the move knight h5 in this main line, line with castles. So after b takes c3, the move knight h5 is very interesting. You are using the fact that the f4 square is sort of weak for the moment, that white doesn't have any easy discoveries with e4 or e3, because the f3 pawn is blocking this diagonal. You're using an opportunity to play the move f5, and if white is going to fight for the center, why not do the same? Now in this position, e4 has never been played. After e4, if you just try expanding and punishing the knight, this check can really be deadly, because if you try to cover that with g3, then knight takes g3, and you basically have a very lost game. You have lost the right to castle. So after the move knight h5, the situation is very interesting. White is unable to play his thematic e4, the reason why he played f3, so he goes for knight h3. Knight h3 is a resourceful move because it controls these two squares, and it prepares the very aggressive move g4, trying to punish the knight for placing itself on h5. And now black follows this up with f5, stopping e4 for the moment. Now playing e4 once again runs into queen h4 check, and you have the same problem. Bishop g5, now stopping that idea finally. Queen e8, defending the knight, and now g4. And we have a very crazy game. And if white is playing for f3, then he's probably expecting that. And I really like this strategy for black. fg4, fg4, knight goes back to f6, queen d3. Taking on g4, well, if you take on g4, I think you are just worse after something like rook g1. It could be really dangerous to open up the g file, so even though it's a pawn, probably shouldn't do it. d6 is the main move, trying to reinforce the center. Knight f2. Now defending g4 and rerouting the knight to the center. The knight wasn't really doing that much on h3. e5. Bishop g2, not caring about the central push. Knight c6. Bishop takes f6, getting rid of one of the defenders of the king. Rook takes, and now castles. And if this is the best white can get, I really would prefer to be black here. I'm not saying that black is better, the position is equal, but I just find it easier to play black here. You have a hard time developing your bishop, because if you move it, then you cannot move the knight, and you might run into some problems. But I would say that the white king is really unsafe here, and that white didn't get that much with his central pawn majority. So after bc3, which is going to happen if black castles, a3, bishop takes, b takes, black could go for the move knight h5. And if you face the f3 variation, I would recommend that. I was actually supposed to play mate in a training game today, and I had prepared this move knight h5. Unfortunately, we didn't play the game after all. We're going to play it on Saturday, probably, or Monday or Tuesday, so I hope he's not going to watch the video, because I still plan to play this idea with knight h5. So anyway, the second move is knight e8, and that's the main move. Now, this move isn't preparing f5, this move has something else in mind. e4 expanding, and now b6. And black is going all hyper-modern. And now if you look at this position, this seems like two lunatics are playing chess. In my opinion, white has moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. Black has moved 2 pawns and managed to castle. That means that he had to move away 2 pieces. But all of his piece moves are sort of underdeveloped now, and neither side has a single piece developed on move 7. I don't think there are many variations with that. In fact, it would be interesting to know how many variations, if any, have 0 pieces developed for both sides on move 7. Well, I guess you can count this knight as developed. Okay, bishop d3, finally developing a piece, and now bishop a6. And black's strategy here is simple. Black wants to put pressure on c4. Almost always, when black captures on c3, the c4 pawn is a major weakness, and it's always easy to attack it with b6, bishop a6, knight c6, knight a5. And you have 2 attackers on very natural squares, attacking a pawn which isn't easily defended. It can be defended with queen e2, with something like queen c2, queen a2. But if white has to lock down his pieces to the defense of a pawn, it might become uncomfortable. So knight h3 is the move. The knight is coming back to the center with knight f2 most often. The knight can also go to the g5 square if need be. It could also go to f4. So it's a good square for the knight. e2 is not as good because it has one option less, so knight h3 is the main move. Knight c6 going to a5, castles, knight a5. And now the only way to defend, if you don't want to play c5, which is really bad after takes, you have ruined your center, is queen e2, and now c5. Taking isn't a good move because you weaken your center. You then have two really weak pawns here, which can be targeted further in the future. And after c5, d5, the sort of King's Indian plan doesn't really work here, and it's not as good because you don't want to resolve this central tension. You play the move e5. And the move e5 is definitely best here. If black ever takes, you are happy because you can then push your pawn to c5 and resolve this tension. And that's in fact what's going to happen in most cases. Here black should continue with the move f6, trying to undermine the center, and now bishop f4, so that if black takes, white can recapture with the bishop. We have cd4 now, cd4, and now d5 by black. This is considered to be the most active continuation. Now these positions after f6 are extremely complicated, and if you play castles on move 4 against f3, you really have to know a lot about this center and the flexibility and the changes that can happen. This is called a fluid or dynamic center, and a lot of things can happen here. I've been trying to understand it when I've prepared for Mate, and I've come to the conclusion that this idea with black playing d5 in the end is fine and equal, but still there are a lot of chances for white to play an unusual move which you are not prepared for, and then you could be in trouble. So try to play around with this center, capture something, then recapture, and try to see what happens. This structure can end up looking 10 different ways. Bishop f4, so cd4, cd4, d5. And now the best idea for white is of course not to push, we would give black a passed pawn, but to play cd5. And bishop takes d3, a tempo on the queen. And now if black captures with the pawn, then white has a passed pawn, and that's not pleasant, so he takes with the queen. And now white has a ton of different moves. Now we are basically out of theory. The main move is rook f1. This is the most active, controlling the e-file, preparing to either defend this pawn or push it forward. So rook f1, knight c6, attacking the structure. And now rook a to d1, defending rook d8. And now there's this idea of playing queen e3. Your pawn is not hanging. You don't need to play a passive move such as bishop e3, blundering your e5 pawn, because the e6 pawn is hanging. And now the main continuation is fe, bishop e, knight e, and queen e5. And you can see that the e6 pawn is really hard to defend. Black's idea is not to defend it at all. The position is perfectly equal after knight d6, and if white captures and the queens get traded off, white has nothing here with the extra pawn. Black is just going to round it up probably immediately with a move such as knight b5, and the position is once again going to be equal. So here after the move castles, if you know everything and if both sides play well, it's going to be a draw. But that's after the move knight e8 and going for the c4 weakness. So black can choose between two strategies. Knight e8 after, okay, castles, a3, bishop takes, b takes. Knight e8 going for the c4 weakness, or knight h5 going for f5 and trying to open up the king side and stop e4, which in my opinion is a more active plan. And as I said, I prepared that for Mate, so I really like the variation. Okay, now let's look at the second move. The move c5 is an invitation to a structure resembling the Benoni. So if you play the Nimzo Indian, but you understand the Benoni, then the move c5 is for you. You can see that immediately, visually, d5 creates a Benoni structure. So d5 is the main response, castles, and now e4. And now, as soon as the move d6 is played, we have a weird Benoni, different move order, different structure, but a Benoni it is. And knight e2 for white, trying to develop, controlling the f4 square, bringing the knight into f4, trying to put pressure on e6, and trying, more importantly, to defend the d5 square. So if any exchanges happen, the knight can recapture because the c3 knight is pinned for the moment. And it would be really dangerous to take with the e pawn when the king is still in the center. b5, a very active Benoni-like move. which makes a lot of sense. The c4 pawn is on pre. Something like b3 is extremely dangerous on defending the c3 knight. So now knight f4, preparing to do some stuff here. If e5 is played, then I think white is perfectly fine. Black has no counterplay. The knight just retreats to h3 and the c4 pawn is defended. So e d5, knight d5, knight d5 and queen d5. Once again, you don't want to take with the pawn, which would be a perfect resemblance to the Benoni, because your king is stuck in the center and black has a tempo with rook e8. And also, your queen on d5 is a good piece attacking the rook, and it's not that easy to defend that rook. And you might be in trouble as black if you're not careful. This might seem like black has blundered, but the move queen b6 saves the day, and now if you take, of course, just bishop b7 wins the queen. So queen b6, the only move here to defend the rook indirectly. Bishop f4, attacking the d6 weakness, Benoni plan, always put pressure on d6. Bishop e6, attacking the queen, and now queen takes d6. This is a pawn sacrifice line, but c4 is about to drop, so it's going to be fine. Queen a5, increasing the pressure on c3. Queen d2 has to defend. Knight c6, more pressure in the center. And now king f2 finally getting out of the pin, knight d4. And this knight, which black has planted on d4, is, I think, more than enough compensation for the lost pawn, which is going to be regained anyway. So rook b1, bc4, a3, forcing a trade. Knight b3, a tempo first, but after queen e1, bishop c3, queen c3, queen b5 has to happen. And now we have a fairly even position. Both sides have 6 pawns. Black's king is safer. Black has a wonderful knight, but black has a weakness on c4, which isn't really that easy to defend. And an imbalanced equal position it is, and I think this is really interesting to play. So if you play the Benoni, the move c5 is really good. Okay, now let's get into the main line and the most heavily analyzed position after d5. This, if you play the move f3 against the Nimzo, you can expect almost all the time. After the move d5, a3, once again resolving the issue of the bishop before doing anything else. Bishop takes, b takes, and now c5. The move d takes c4 is probably the worst move you could play because of e4. So we want to try and reinforce the d5 square, or at least leave it be. c6 is a move, but that's too passive because still e4 and f takes after black takes. And if not, then e5. So c5, trying to create problems in the center before white manages to consolidate and to open things up after castling. So now white, of course, cannot play e4 because it's defended twice. So we have c takes d5, knight takes d5, taking with the knight, putting pressure on c3, and now d takes c5 and queen a5. In this position you can see that black has 6 pawns, white for the moment has 7 pawns, but one of them is surely about to drop. One thing I would like to point out, white doesn't have to play passive moves here, and in fact if you play a passive move because you don't know the position, you could lose. Now, being afraid of queen takes c3 is an irrational fear because bishop d2. Being afraid of knight takes c3 is also an irrational fear because you have queen d2. So the main move here, in fact, is gaining a tempo on the knight with e4, and the knight has to go back. The main move is knight e7. If you play something like knight takes c3, then queen d2, and you are in a lot of trouble because your g7 pawn is hanging. Something like knight c6, bishop b2, the knight goes back to a4, attacking the bishop, and now queen takes queen, knight takes queen, and simply bishop takes g7. And white has now gained a clean pawn, and this is almost unplayable for black because something like bishop b5 is coming. You have to play knight c6 or lose a knight, so it's not easy to play. It's really not easy to play. Okay, so after e4, you simply retreat the knight, knight e7, and now bishop e3. Still not caring about these captures here. If black captures now, Let me just check that with an engine. If black captures now, you tuck your king away, and you're fine. I mean, as I said, f3 is a risky variation for white, so it's not that you are going to have your advantage in every variation. You're basically giving it away with f3 because it's not the main move. And you're going to end up playing variations like this one. But this, I think, if black takes on c3, gives you a very strong bishop pair. Black is yet to castle, and you can harass this queen. So this I would be happy with. You even develop your knight with tempo. So after bishop e3, black castles, queen b3 now finally defending everything, and queen c7. Queen c7 is sort of a centralizing move, trying to bring the queen back into play, preparing to develop the bishop without dropping b7 and reinforcing stuff. Bishop b5, that's the main move. Knight a5, I'm sorry, bishop b5, knight ec6, knight e2, and knight a5, attacking the queen, queen b4, and white's pieces are active. White's king is less safe. White is a pawn up, but it's not a real pawn, and the position is once again equal. Black has to play a very strange move here, but a move that makes a lot of sense. He wants to bring his bishop to life, so e5, and this now gives the e6 square to the bishop. Castles, finally, knight a6 attacking the queen, and bishop takes, b takes, rook a1. Once again, 6 pawns for black, 7 for white. It's not easy to play for either side. I have to say I don't like this position for either side, but, well, that's just me. Bishop e6, preparing to restrain the queen some more, and now rook d5. And this is the point of the variation, and this is why you have to know the main line really well as white if you play it. This move, rook d5, is a killer. It's a positional exchange sacrifice which doesn't give black any other options but to take the rook. Okay, first he can gain a tempo on the queen. The queen only has the a4 square, but now you basically have to take. And white is playing that because he has these 3 really strong central pawns that are impossible to stop unless black gives the exchange back. So this pattern is going to occur very often in the f3 Nimzo, in the main line with d5. So you need to be aware of that. And if possible, study the variation to make sure that you know exactly where it happens. I'm going to show you this once more before we move on from move 20. So after f3 d5, you basically have 20 moves of theory that you have to know until the exchange sacrifice. So remember that taking on c3 is never an option. Remember that as white, you want to harass black's queen side and force the knights to the side. Remember that as black, you want to play the move e5 to play bishop e6. And after the move rook a to d1, you have this pattern with rook d5. And after takes, it's really hard to play black. You have to play something like rook b5 now. It's one of the main moves for a reason, putting pressure on these pawns, preparing to sack the exchange back, and defending your knight in case the queen moves. And now white has to play energetically. d6, queen c6, knight g3, trying to reroute the knight to the king side, preparing to attack, and now rook takes c5. With rook takes c5, that's not an exchange sacrifice yet because white's queen is hanging. So if white takes the rook, black is going to take the queen. But there's an idea behind this. You play the move queen g4. And this is still theory. There are still games in this variation. Not many, but you have to know them. And I would advise players with white who play f3 to study the games and to understand what's going on here. If I turn on the engine, white is slightly worse here, but it's not clear why, and I would rather be white. And in fact, all games played in this variation, white has won. So rook c4 attacking the queen, knight f5. You don't lose the queen, okay, because you have this and this. So rook g4 should be played, knight e7. King h8, knight c6. This seems like white is losing a piece, but he is not because the rook is hanging. So rook a4, defending the knight. Knight takes a5, rook takes a5, and bishop takes a7. And believe it or not, the position is equal. White is even slightly better, if you ask me. For humans, it should be easier to play white. You have 2 pawns, you have a pawn for the exchange, but you have a d6 pawn for the exchange, a passed pawn. And I don't know, if you're not prepared to play energetically like this, then, well, don't play f3. And I'm not sure who I'd rather have here. No more games from this position, and this is something to be studied carefully. But if black is not careful, these pawns could queen. Let's say you take here, and white pushes c4. Let's say you play something like rook e8, and then all of a sudden c5 comes, and I don't know. I wouldn't want to be black here. White is plus half, so not lost for black, but black is definitely the one who could lose this, and not white. Okay, with this I would like to stop. So as black, 3 ways to react to f3, castles, c5 or d5. I would once again recommend the move castles. I prefer that with the continuation of knight h5. If you want to play c5, you're going to enter something resembling a Benoni, and if you want to play d5, then be prepared for this. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. I hope you liked the Kmoch variation of the Nimzo. Let me know what you think, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.